Good morning, friends. Yesterday we explored the warning of not being belligerent and self-righteous in the way we interact in the world. Because the world will react to that, and we assuredly will suffer for it. But that isn't the kind of suffering that our Lord says we will be blessed concerning. We are blessed when we are persecuted for the sake of righteousness, not for the sake of self-righteousness. Having reaffirmed that, I do want to go back to another reason we can be joyful when we are legitimately persecuted, when we struggle and suffer as a result of obedience and faithfulness to Christ's purpose, and that is because we find strength in the midst of that suffering. In 2 Corinthians 12:7-10, Paul writes, "So to keep me from becoming conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited." And stopping right there for a moment, the intention of this thorn, as Paul describes it, whatever specifically it was to keep him from becoming conceited and prideful, which would very much affect his ministry in the way we warned about yesterday. Well, with that in mind, he continues, "3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, 'My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. For the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weakness, insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong.'" Among other scenarios, insults and persecutions and the suffering that goes along with them generally make us feel weak. They can bring us real low. And yet it is at those moments that Paul describes of intense personal weakness that the Lord demonstrates his superlative strength. And that's why Paul says that he has learned to boast gladly concerning those weaknesses, as he says, "so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." And that is the most important part of this matter that we can never forget. That once again, it's not about us. It's about Christ. As we've seen, the persecution, the insults, the hardships that result, they're not ultimately directed against us anyway. They're directed at Christ himself. Once again, we consider the words of the Lord to the prophet Samuel when the nation of Israel asked him to appoint for them a king. In response to this situation, God said, "Obey the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you, but they have rejected me from being king over them. According to all the deeds that they have done, from the day I brought them up out of Egypt even to this day, forsaking me and serving other gods, so they are also doing to you." And this exchange models for us so clearly the same logic that we talked about this past Sunday. Yes, we bear the brunt of rejection because the people are actually rejecting God. Because it's only natural that having rejected God, they will then reject whatever comes from God or is of God. But that reminds us that though we do receive the rejection, we have to deal with it. The principal figure is still the Lord himself, and he will ultimately be the one to deal with the issue. It will be in the Lord's power that all things are resolved. It's not our job to retaliate, nor is it our job to make people believe and so be saved. In fact, as is, I'm sure, obvious, we can't make people believe, no matter how much we wish we could. We simply do not have that ability. That's God's job and his job alone. And that's why we can be so weak. We can experience such fundamental feebleness on our part, and yet we can still experience the tremendous power of God as he is the one who orchestrates all things according to his own purpose. And the application of this, then, friends, is that we should then never give up hope, no matter how severe the persecution, the rejection, and the insults may be, especially if we receive that rejection from people that we truly do love and we want to see saved. Because you know, as well as I do, that it's not at all uncommon for believers to have loved ones, whether family members or dear friends, who don't know the Lord and who ridicule us for our faith. But do not give up hope, because where you and I are weak, and so we're incapable of saving those people ourselves, the Lord is capable. He can save them. He is the one who's strong and powerful. And you know what? That strength of the Lord is so often shown through his people, just like you and me. As Paul wrote, "I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." Paul was weak in and of himself, but as he concluded a moment later, "When I am weak, then I am strong." And where did that strength come from? It came from the power of Christ resting upon him. Despite the difficulties, despite the hardships, despite the persecutions, Paul was still able to speak, to respond, to share the gospel boldly and appropriately because of Christ's power in him. And the same thing applies for us today. When you think about those people whom you love and yet you know don't believe, a brother, a sister, your children perhaps, a husband or a wife, whoever you love, and yet every time you try to talk to them about the Lord, God, Jesus, the Bible, truth in general, you meet with resistance every time. Despite that, keep trusting in and relying upon the strength of the Lord. Recognize your own weakness, rely upon the Lord in humility of full submission, and ask him to work his power in you for the sake of that person. And then recognize the strength you have to continue speaking to that person about Christ, because Christ is in you and is working that strength in you, and he will work the power that's required in that other person. Now again, whether that person responds or not, it's not up to you, it's up to the Lord and his power. But your faithfulness to and reliance upon the Lord will produce the power you need to obey the Lord and continue to speak. And there is tremendous blessing in that. Hopefully to see that person saved. But even if not, you will receive the comfort and blessing of the Lord regardless. So let us together boast in our weaknesses so that we can then see the power of Christ working within us. Have a good and godly day, and Lord willing, I will see you soon.